Previously, the protagonist began making his journey in the new world after being transferred by the guys who work for the king, and just after becoming the orphanage director because of having no skills to defeat the Demon King. Even though all of his classmates have been glorified by the others, he is now the most desired person by everyone as he keeps on overcoming great wrath for his children in the orphanage. After finding Lucia as the first child of the orphanage, he saves Aaron from the kidnappers to be her guardian as well. Now that he has the company of a goddess, things are getting more interesting for him these days. Let's accompany the protagonist in his journey, and if you are interested to check out part 1, it will be linked in the description. Keep watching. The next time, Shione begins to hold the protagonist accountable for what he thinks of her and claims that she has the request to play house with him, which seems to look like a serious request for the time being. But the protagonist makes it look like he barely cares about what she thinks and claims that they can play somewhere else without disturbing him. And he claims that he might have promised to teach them how to play, but he didn't promise that he would be the one to play with them. As they keep on bickering about making his decision, someone knocks on the door, and an old man and one knight come with him. Then when he looks at the man, he thinks that the old man looks like he is using a cane, but he keeps on giving him creeps more than the knight who has been guarding him. When he has been successful at taking a better look at the old man, he claims that the protagonist must have been the expert one as he heard of him to be, and the protagonist becomes direct at the man to hear if he has something to do in here in the first place. The old man instantly claims that he has something important to discuss with him, so it will be wise to let him get into the house at once. And the protagonist begins to get them into the house. The old man claims that his name is Tito and he is also the head of the Kinberg family, and introduces his son Tio as he is the number 2 in the family. The old man claims that some family members of his had some business with him, and the protagonist thinks that he must have been speaking of the couple he met earlier. The protagonist assumes that the old man must have come in here for some kind of revenge, but the old man insists that he shouldn't think of him this easily and hopes that he will calm down soon enough. After seeing the frustration of the old man, the protagonist feels like he is hard to read to begin with, and the old man explains that he asked his family members to collect the debt from the previous owner of the orphanage, Luna. He even elaborates that the family member is yet to be excluded from the family, but the previous owner of the orphanage is long gone, and knowing that his relative tried to solve the situation in a whole different way, which might have caused the protagonist some trouble in the first place. But the more the protagonist listens to the old man, the more he feels like he is unable to understand the situation, as he thinks that he is not about to do something as he doesn't have anything related to the old director who used to lead the orphanage. Then he also includes that the king didn't speak of the matter as well, and the old man asks his son to show him the papers, and he asks the protagonist how much he really knows about the orphanage system, to begin with. According to the old man and the system of the country, it seems that the control of the orphanage is only dependent on the director who is running it and no one else. As the paper shows that the previous one still owns this facility, it means that the old man can still use his services in here. Then the protagonist claims that he must have been trying to take the orphanage away since it is in his right, and the protagonist asks the man if there is any way to pay him back with interest. After hearing that the payment is about 10 million, the protagonist claims that he will be able to pay 1/3 of the money right now, and thinks of discussing some kind of alternative to this situation so they are both able to help each other. Then when the protagonist is yet to make up his mind, the others including Shione come in saying that they do not want the orphanage to close down in any way. Aaron and Lucia insist that they will become good girls, and Shione keeps on watering her eyes as if she has been using her ability to make it look like she is feeling worse than everyone else. Then when the protagonist thinks of the situation properly, he feels like if they end up taking the orphanage from him, it will be easier for him as his life will get easier. But he questions the old man if taking away the poor orphanage for someone who has been running this place is about to be that respectable. The old man then reveals that he came to meet him for some kind of quest, and he claims that if he is able to make it complete, then he will think of extending the deadline for the debt. Then when the protagonist is unable to understand what the potions are, Aaron begins to explain what it is, including the matter of the intermediate potions, which is rarely seen in the city market. The main problem is that Tio's son is rather sick and his health can be recovered by using the potions right now. The old man and his son bows down in front of him, meaning that the situation is rather dire for them, and the protagonist understands the old man's feelings. The things that he lost in his childhood make him feel rather down about it the more he keeps on thinking of it. Then when the protagonist keeps on searching for the materials that he will need on his own to make the potions, his girls come in to meet him, so they are able to accompany him on his journey. Shione insists that they will be able to protect the orphanage together, and Aaron acts like she will be helping him the most in this task. Also, Lucia claims that her smelling ability will be useful for him in this task, and the protagonist ends up accepting their request to help him out in the end, knowing that they wouldn't stop insisting to help him out. Then when they finally make their journey, Erin begins to teach them all about the potions and acts like the elven princess that she is, and she claims that it is some kind of medicine created from mixing plant leaves and magical liquid of high concentration. She thinks that they will need cure plants and even some magical liquid to begin with, and they think of starting their expedition by searching for some plants in the beginning. As soon as she calls in Lucia, she thinks that she understands it and thinks of dealing with smelling the herbs on Hero 1, and she thinks of the situation rather seriously as she is about to work on the thing that she feels more strongly about. As soon as she begins to smell the cure plants, she feels like something hits her nose and begins directing them into some place, and they think that it must be normal for her to act like this, rushing and bashing. But the protagonist insists that she has to stay close to him as he will have to protect her if something goes wrong. And they think that the protagonist has been acting like a knight for some time already. They end up making their way into the forest and end up coming in front of some kind of cure plant, and Shione comes with a bunch of them in her hands out of nowhere. Then when she holds out the plants in front of them, Lucia claims that these plants might look like they have been used for the potions, but they are actually poisonous plants named the gift plants, even though they are quite hard to even notice to begin with, so they will have to be careful in the future dealing with them. Then as soon as the protagonist keeps on storing each one of them in his own way, both Erin and Lucia are shocked, and he begins to ask him how many of them they will need to make a potion. As he is unable to realize how they are able to detect the difference, the protagonist claims that they will have to take a look at their stems as well, as the round one is always cure, but the semicircle one will be the gift one. Lucia feels like it is some great detection made by him. But when he insists that it is really needed when someone needs to eat the wild plants, they are both out of their mind, not knowing why he would have been thinking about doing that in the first place. Then he claims that he has been doing them since his childhood, once he had to avoid being hungry in the most despicable situation out in the wilderness. After collecting a bunch of them, they feel like the amount they have gathered must be enough for their adventure right now, and Shione thinks of making some magic liquid for their next step, and she keeps on working for that as they will need a lot of them to make the potions. After the mixing is done, the mashing gets done by Erin, and she claims that they will have to make it happen until the pest transforms into some kind of gel in the first place, which is rather harder than what one would expect. When everything is done to make the potions, they feel like it is looking like some regular potion, and they are all hopeful knowing that the adventure has gone well for them. Even though they are done for the time being, Lucia and Erin insist that they need to make some on their own as well, and Lucia makes it complete after trying hard for a while. But they end up feeling like she must have failed, and when Lucia begins to taste her own potion, she feels like the taste is rather bitter for her, and Shione keeps on trying to make a better version of the potions they have made. When she keeps on making more sounds than ever, the protagonist asks her to become quieter, and the excitement brings a lot of chaos as the whole bowl bursts into nothing and some kind of explosion hits them all. When the deal is done, the explosion reminds the protagonist that they are all lucky that his protection skill activated at the end of the line, and Shione begins to cry her eyes out and even her clothes are ripped out. Not like the protagonist is complaining about that or something, but when it comes to making the intermediate level potions, it gets rather hard for Erin herself, and she feels like something must be wrong in the process that she has been using at this time. Lucia starts crying, feeling like she is unable to help her with it, and Shione claims that she is sorry as well as she is unable to protect their home as well as their big sister, to begin with. Then when Lucia begins to sob rather sadly, everyone else begins to calm her down as she feels like she will be separated from them soon enough, and the protagonist claims that they have been lamenting like that for a while, which has no effectiveness in their situation. Then when he comes in to handle the matter, Erin insists that he is unable to control his magic, so it will end up becoming a huge dangerous situation for him as well. But while all of them continue to hold their bowls in their hands, the protagonist starts making the potions by mixing all the ingredients and following all the steps on his own without speaking much. When the glubbing is done steadily, the protagonist claims that the task is already done by him, and when the potion begins to steam on its own, all of the girls in front of them continue to stare at them rather excitedly as if they have been seeing some kind of magic happening in front of them. As soon as the work is done, Shione keeps on holding the protagonist close to her melons as if she is trying to squeeze him through and through to make him feel like he is about to lose his mind. But when Aaron claims that she is unable to understand why it is only happening right now, the protagonist claims that they have to respect 2 points in that fraction, as one is to the freshness of the herbs, which is related to the process they think of using to make vegetable soups. When Aaron claims that the potions are rather hard to make, as that type of craftsmanship makes someone take a lot of time, such as years in the first place, to make a proper one. But the protagonist claims that it must be wrong if she is thinking about it like that. But the protagonist insists that her process in the first place is rather wrong to begin with, and there is no difference between making vegetable soups and even making potions. When the protagonist begins to explain more about checking out the herbs on his own, Lucia feels rather shocked to hear that the protagonist must have checked each one of them while seeing them with his own eyes. Also, the next one that he mentions is that they will have to pour a large amount of high-purity mana, and the protagonist claims that he can use some resurrection-like magic, which shocks the hell out of them at once. After hearing that the protagonist uses resurrection magic to make potions, Aaron feels like her head is about to burst, and she keeps on shouting against him. Then when the argument is about to end, Shione claims that if they end up announcing the whole thing, the whole continent will be at war, and Lucia is rather proud to see that she is successfully witnessing these things happening in the first place. But the protagonist insists that they do not need to think of making it public, as they need to make it rather secret from the public eyes, and thinks of the matter that they will be staying in the orphanage as they have completed their mission given by the old man. Once the remaining 4 are finally done, the protagonist ends up hanging them at once on his own body and thinks that they cannot think of losing these in any way, as they are quite important to them. Then when the protagonist instantly holds Lucia's mouth, he mentions that something is not right about what is happening around them for now. Then once he thinks of looking at the place around them, some goblin comes up to them, and even Shione is unable to wonder why the goblins are here in this area. But according to Shione, they are not some normal goblins, as if they are the superior versions of them, and she claims that these monsters have to be at least S-rank monsters, and the monster even starts speaking with them. It seems that they have been smelling the intermediate level potion from far away inside the forest, and claim that they will have to die if they think of not handing the potions over to them as soon as possible. But Lucia claims that they should keep on thinking of their hands on them, as the potions are important in their lives right now. And as soon as she claims that the protagonist will be the one who will not to make it happen, the goblins get ready to attack them at once, knowing that their speech is not working in this expedition. As soon as one of the goblins continues to rush at them after calling them fools, he claims that he must have been able to get them a peaceful death if they thought of listening to them. But once the monster charges at the protagonist, some slash cuts off one of its hands and it falls down on the ground to color the whole ground at once, and the other goblin is unable to wonder what is even happening in this place. The protagonist is holding the cut off hand of the goblin, and he seems rather annoyed by the goblins as they keep on making a lot of sounds at once. Then he claims that even though he was thinking of solving the situation in his own peaceful way, now that they have been causing chaos for a while, the protagonist has no way other than tackling the situation in the roughest way possible. As he begins to call them some kind of pests, they are even more annoyed than ever, and they keep on charging at them once again. But once when the goblin comes after the protagonist, he hits one of them on the chin and makes them realize that they are not about to have it that easily. One punch gets the most out of the goblin, and he throws the body of the goblin far away from him to be attacked by 2 more monsters right away. Then when the monsters are unable to cope with the situation, he ends up rolling their hands away from him to slice them all at once in one strike by using the knives backward in their faces. The remaining goblin is unable to comprehend what is even happening to him and his men now, and once the protagonist begins to glare at them, they think of reporting the situation to their king as soon as possible. But knowing that he cannot let them get them away, the protagonist begins to throw more of the knives at them once again, and more of the goblins begin to fall down in the next strikes. Then when the fight finally ends, the protagonist feels like the whole time had gone to waste for no single reason, and Lucia keeps on shaking in front of him, calling him master over and over again as she is sacred, and losing her shit throughout this whole time. She thinks that the protagonist has been thinking about them so much that she is even unable to control her emotions this time around. And Aaron claims that the way he claimed that they are the daughters of the orphanage was really interesting. Shione chimes into the conversation to embarrass the protagonist even more, and the protagonist claims that they shouldn't be getting carried away in this situation, as he is really just fulfilling the task that should be done by the owner of the orphanage. Soon enough, he claims that they will have to go back as soon as possible and start getting through the wild forests. When they finally reach the city, they feel like this whole place is rather empty, as if there was some kind of holiday happening around the whole town. Even Lucia thinks that the situation must be rather weird for her, as people should have been in this place this time for buying and selling things. Then when the protagonist keeps on wandering around, he notices that some people from his class are present in this area, and he is unable to understand why they are in here all of a sudden. Then when he meets the old man, he is unable to wonder why he is here to meet him all of a sudden and claims that even though he didn't want it to happen, the king has claimed that the orphanage will be confiscated as soon as possible, and all of them are losing their shit after hearing this kind of thing after returning from their expedition. Then when the protagonist hears that they are thinking of taking back the orphanage, he starts losing his calm as they have been working hard to manage to fulfill the task they have promised to do for them in the first place. Then as Lucia begins to cry her eyes out, as her master has been working hard to make this kind of potion, and the old man is unable to realize how they have managed to make it happen even though it is supposed to be one of the hardest tasks possible. But the protagonist claims that he doesn't care about all of this here, as the main thing that he is concerned about is that the old man is not about to keep the promise that he made to him in the first place. Then being unable to comprehend the situation, the old man claims that Naomi has been unable to keep her enragement confined in herself, and he is now following the orders of the kingdom in every way possible. After hearing that, the protagonist feels like the public finances of the kingdom and their orphanage have nothing to do with each other in the first place, but the fact that there will be a place to look for to store the goods when the war breaks out is rather problematic for them. The momentary feeling that the king will end up taking over any lands possible in his need is rather uncanny, but it goes with the rules so no one will be able to say against it. Then the protagonist claims that the relations with this kingdom and the neighboring country are not as great as they have been talking about in the morning, and the adventurer comes in running for the protagonist, claiming that they are in his need as fast as they can, as if something important is happening. Now that everyone, including the mafia leader and even the adventurer's leader, is calling him whenever they can, continues to make him feel rather annoyed, and the man claims that the goblin catastrophe has already begun, as the Goblin King will be passing through in this spot the next noon. The announcement of the catastrophe makes all of them feel like some kind of shiver is running through their neckline, and the protagonist is unable to realize how he should be feeling right now, as if he is at a loss for his emotions. On the other hand, the people who came with the protagonist keep on taking care of evacuating all of the people as much as it is possible, and they think that they have been thinking too much of the Goblin King in this situation, as if they barely care about it. Then a woman comes in saying that the Goblin Stampede is a legendary event that has left nothing but ruin when it ends. As when the Goblin King is born, they start engaging and living in united situations, and they think of forming someday when they will march all together to call it a stampede, which is rather dangerous. Then when it finally comes to happen, nothing remains in their way as they keep on demolishing everything in front of them, and the fact that it is the goal made by the king makes them feel rather obscene. The fact that even none of them in this world has been able to finish off a single Goblin King has been noted in this lifetime, as he has been guarded by a lot of bodyguards at once, and anyone who would think of entering their property or territory is nothing but a fool. But the guys ahead of her think that they will be fine, as they are heroes renamed by the king, and they think that there is no way the goblins will be able to do something to them, no matter the number. The woman claims that she has a lot of faith in them, and the cunning heroes continue to wield the sword in their hands, saying that they will be doing everything possible to protect the country and its legacy. Miyamoto, who is probably nothing more than a fool, claims that he will be done when they will still be busy with taking their afternoon nap. When it comes to attending to the matter of the frontal confrontation with the goblins, Aaron thinks that there is no way someone like him would ever even be able to handle that many goblins at once in the first place. Even the protagonist thinks that something like this is never about to happen in any way, even if they try their hardest. And after feeling like he is hopeless, the leader of the adventurers keeps on requesting him to help them out. He claims that the whole guild has been depending on it, as their lives depend on it in the first place, and the protagonist thinks that it sounds rather lame that the whole guild has been waiting for someone like him who is nothing but a newcomer. Then the man gives the list of merit system in front of the protagonist, and they claim that he is one of the few people who has the rank of S in his favor. Then as the guild is able to manage at least about 300 people, the protagonist will be the one to lead them all against the goblins, and he claims that there is no way they are about to survive without his help in this moment. Then when the man keeps on bowing down in front of him, the protagonist smiles and claims that he is thinking of quitting after asking the man to lift his head, even though the man keeps on insisting that he will have to do it as there is no one else who can do it other than him. The protagonist claims that he is not about to do it in any way. At this time, the man even remarks that even the orphanage will be destroyed if he thinks of giving up, and he insists that he will even manage some soldiers to do the childcare for him, so he will be able to get some time on his own to lead the army they will be forming on his own. Then the man claims that he will make the payment of about 10 million gil in the end. But the protagonist keeps saying that he is too busy to even think about it. But when he thinks of the payment offer made by the man, he feels like they have a simple solution in front of them, and Lucia begins to wonder what the protagonist must be thinking of right now, which is feeling so simple to him right now. Then the protagonist claims that the old man will have to stop with the confiscation as soon as possible for now, and claims that as the guild master is thinking of giving 10 million for the work he will do, he will be paying the old man with that money for sure, and the process will only be paying forward to the old man. Then when the leader is unable to wonder what he must be speaking of right now, the protagonist claims that the orphanage's debts will be cleared in that way by repaying the Kimberg family head, and the Adventurers Guild will also be able to get his help, which makes the man feel like there is no way he would think of losing out on this kind of offer for any reason. Knowing that success will be guaranteed, he thinks of accepting the offer made by the protagonist, and the old man claims that they will have no issue with that as well, which will be fine in their will as well. Then the protagonist clears up the fact that the whole thing will be a one-time deal for him, as he will never do something like this in his whole life. Then when he thinks of moving forward with the plan, Lucia comes out of nowhere claiming that she will be accompanying him as well, and the others think of accompanying him as well. They claim that instead of depending on him all the time, they will have to work on their own as well to help him out this time, as a family. Then when the protagonist thinks of the word family, he scoffs on his own, not knowing what to answer, and ends up agreeing to their offer in the end anyway. Soon enough, Aaron begins to show the map to the protagonist, as they will have to get into the battle pretty soon, so knowing the map will be informative for them. And even though Aaron was thinking of something basic, the protagonist claims that their destination will be Nalia Plains, in the northwestern area. When they finally reach that area, the protagonist thinks of camping for a while and asks everyone to accompany him, as he will have to prepare the resting area for some time. Lucia even brings the food for them at once, and the protagonist reminds them all that they shouldn't be making any kind of fire, which will continue to attract the attention of many others around them, including the goblins. Then as Aaron begins to shout saying that no one will come in here, not even the allies or the goblins, and the protagonist claims that they do not need to meet with the army in any sense, as they need to only hunt down the Goblin King in the first place. But when Lucia thinks that it sounds impossible, just like what Doran said, the protagonist claims that there is a way to win against the king by thinking of taking advantage of the placement. He claims that he will be using the army as the decoy in the first place, and when they are unable to understand, he claims that when the army attacks, all of them, including the goblins, will be fighting. That is when they will have to engage against the king, and the protagonist claims that he will need the help of all three of them to make the preparations to fulfill their plan. At night, when the protagonist wakes up, he notices that they are all snuggling against each other and even drooling over each other, as they think of the situation rather lightly. But Lucia outside near the cliff seems to be busy about thinking something, and no one knows what she is even thinking about at this time. And she is glowing from time to time, looking at the night sky. Then when the protagonist comes over to Lucia to have a conversation with her, she claims that she was unable to fall asleep on her own, and he asks what she thinks of him in the first place. He assumes that she must think of him to be some kind of monster to begin with, and she claims that she used to think that he must have been some kind of cold and manipulative person. But now she claims that she has been wrong at that time. She knows that he really cares about them, which is the main reason why she is so close to him right now, and she also knows that there is no way he would want to admit the love for them. She thinks that they keep on creating more and more trouble for him, and she adds that he has been doing his best for them anytime it is possible to do so. But the protagonist claims that taking care of them is nothing but child's play, and he claims that there is no way he would want them to profess their gratitude to him in any way. Lucia feels rather warm after listening to the protagonist, and she claims that she has been thinking about her homeland for a while now. She claims that she is from a small town called Karen, which is just north of Warzim Kingdom. She feels like there has been a similar looking overlook in her hometown, as she used to witness the scene with her parents in her childhood. But it has been years since that happened, and she thinks that she almost forgot about all those memories for a while now, and the protagonist claims that he is rather sorry to get in her way if she was busy thinking about her childhood and lost memories. But she states that she is rather glad that he is here to have a chat with her at this time, and all of her bad feelings have gone after seeing him, as he is a wonderful person to begin with, who keeps on serving her courage each time they talk. Then when it comes to serving her gratitude, she claims that he can do everything with her, including taking her body, but the protagonist thinks that he gets the theory behind it, without even understanding what she has been trying to mean. Then when he insists that he is looking forward to it, Lucia blushes the sweetest way possible, assuming that her master is interested in her as well. But then she soon realizes that he has been speaking of the trip to her hometown, and she claims that she needs to meet her parents so she is able to say that someone wonderful is looking after her for now so they wouldn't have to worry about her. They make plans to meet Lucia's parents' graves, and in the morning once again, they all start sitting in one place to form their next plan. Soon enough, they hear that the stampede is moving forward on their own, and they assume that the Great Goblin's migration is now happening. And the protagonist feels like all of his companions are now nervous after seeing the scene ahead of them. Now when he thinks of the Alliance, he thinks that they are planning to stop the goblins before they enter the gate, and he assumes that they literally have their backs behind the wall, and Aaron points out that the stampede has stopped moving for a while. After seeing this, the protagonist feels like the king must be nearby and he must have been advising them to follow the orders, which is just them playing the roles without having any issues. When the protagonist thinks of it, he feels like it must be rather a coincidence that he has been leading those three in his back, and he feels like something is guiding him as well to save the Luna orphanage. Then when he looks back at them, he asks them if they know what they should be doing right now, and they all feel like they are already sure of it since they have practiced a lot on their own. Shione claims that she will be doing their best as well, and the protagonist feels like they have something positive to look forward to, and they all start to cheer on their own as they know that they will have to look forward to something big. On the previous day, when the protagonist claims that they will have to learn the plan before heading to the goblins, everyone begins to serve up saying that none of them have any kind of combat and real-life fighting experience, and the protagonist claims that they have been misunderstanding his proposition from the beginning as they are not said to fight with the goblins. But when Shione keeps on acting dramatic, the protagonist claims that he will feed her to the goblins if she keeps on acting like this, and Aaron feels like she will be the logician when it comes to making the plans in this case. The protagonist claims that as long as they are able to cope with the plans, nothing will be difficult for them. Then moving to the first thing, Shione claims that she will be ready whenever they are in need by the protagonist. At the present time, Shione begins to breathe in the most efficient way possible, and Aaron claims that she will be using some kind of spell to amplify the magic, and the protagonist feels like he has never seen something like this before without the chanting. He then feels like it must be rather great to see that Aaron is taking the situation this seriously as well. Shione claims that she has been having fun splashing on her feet, and the protagonist is unable to wonder what she has been even doing in this serious time, as dancing is the last thing he expected right now. Then after seeing through more of the dancing show, the protagonist feels like he will have to do something about her, and Aaron insists that he needs to see this through. Aaron feels like the magic is being refined, and the protagonist is unable to understand how it is happening like this. Even though Shione now looks like a clown, she has been refining the magic she has been possessing this whole time through her uncanny ritual. Then as soon as the sky becomes cloudy, and when the boiling rain comes in, Shione claims that it will be a little too hot for the goblins, and the protagonist feels like it should have happened in a wide area to begin with, as he didn't mention that she would have to burn the goblins with all that. But the protagonist knows that the effect will be the same, so there is no change with that, and the protagonist feels like it should be rather concerning that she is a spirit goddess after all. Then when he claims that he will start respecting her from now on, the protagonist feels like renaming her the Boiler from now on, and the face and reaction of Shione change in an instant, assuming that he is not thinking of her with kindness. Then when they begin to argue with each other for the next 5 minutes, Lucia calls in the protagonist saying that the goblins are now on the move, and they feel like protecting their king in this kind of situation. Then she feels like the protagonist's plans have been working right now, and they feel like they will now be able to point out the area the king is in right now. For the next move of the plan, Lucia begins to form her next plan, and she ends up smelling the smell of the king to point out who the hell is that king who has been leading this whole stampede. Then after looking for a while, Lucia marks that the black one wearing some kind of cloak is the Goblin King in this time, and the protagonist feels like the man has been blending rather well with the other goblins this whole time, but he has a greater presence than everyone else in this situation. Now that the protagonist knows that the Goblin King has been able to sense his presence, the protagonist claims that he is not the only one who is good at spotting, and he asks Aaron to take a closer look with her spirit magic. Then when the protagonist is about to land in front of the goblins to face them all at once, Lucia claims that she believes it surely that someone like him is not about to be defeated, but she hopes that he will come unharmed to her once again. And the protagonist claims that she shouldn't waste her time thinking about things like this. Realizing that they need to do some more work, Aaron claims that she will directly transfer him to the Goblin King in her own way by using her magic. And Aaron gets nervous, feeling like the wind is too strong near him for some reason. But instead of caring about all that, the protagonist begins to rush through the cliff ahead of him and claims that he is not about to lose in any way. Then when he moves on, Eren feels like she is rather devastated knowing that the protagonist is moving on to the battlefield with his pants ripped, which might make him look rather ridiculous. At that time, the students who came with the protagonist start assuming what has been happening as goblins have already stopped marching, and they feel like the goblins must be afraid of them as they are the heroes of this world. But when they come in front of the guild master, he claims that they cannot pass through the zone knowing that they are not in need of doing something unnecessary, but they insist that they will continue to move in their own way as he doesn't know about them. The main ass of that team, Miyamoto, feels like he is yet to make his great entrance, and when that happens, everything will be fine as people will never be able to stop cheering about him. On the other hand, the Goblin Lord is now having a meeting with the goblins near him, and when the protagonist lands in that spot, all of a sudden, they feel like getting separated from one another in an instant. When the lands begin to crush and the Goblin King stands up from the ruins, he feels like the protagonist is the one who is responsible for all this, and he feels like the protagonist must be rather stupid to treat his kind like that, and the arrogance of coming alone in the battlefield makes him feel rather uncanny and silly. Then when everyone beside them are now gone, the protagonist claims that it will be better for them to fight fair and square since no one is about to come to disturb them right now. But the Goblin King feels like he is acting rather cocky as someone human is not any competitor of him now, as he is the king of atrocity and the king of fear, so he will not be willing to forgive someone like the protagonist ruining his moment. When the transformation of the Goblin King has been fulfilled, he gets huge and charges against the protagonist with his huge hammer, and the lands begin to crush while making a banging sound for everyone to listen to. Lucia feels rather hopeless after hearing the crumbling sounds of the land in front of her, and the goblin remarks that the protagonist is nothing but a puny human, so it had been a shame for him to even trouble himself for someone like him. Then when the dust settles, the protagonist can be seen holding the hammer with his one finger, and the absolute craziness of the moment makes the Goblin King feel like he will lose his mind right now. When the Goblin King points out why he is unable to push him back, the protagonist claims that he has been thinking of testing out his powers, and the protagonist throws the hammer off in the opposite direction. Feeling like he has been humiliated, the Goblin King feels like he is losing his temper for this and claims that the protagonist will soon regret making this kind of decision in his life. Then the protagonist points out that he will have to stand up for himself right now. He thrashes the Goblin King on the ground and keeps on banging the hell out of him on the ground by throwing him here and there. Then the protagonist remarks that the one who will think of messing with the orphanage will never be able to escape from his wrath. And the Goblin King remarks that he will be done for this time, and when he keeps on uttering about the Supreme King, the protagonist feels like he is unable to understand who the king is talking with right now. Just when the protagonist feels like something bad is about to happen, the sky darkens and some kind of aura begins to hit the Goblin King, and the protagonist is unable to wonder what is even happening to the monster standing in front of him. As soon as the power settles down, it seems to be some kind of unbelievable spell that is rather powerful, and the protagonist feels like there must be some kind of cost to form this kind of spell, and starts looking for one, and the bastard king transforms into some kind of formation in between worm and a scorpion at once. As the new mutated creature appears out of nowhere, the protagonist notices that the previous body of the Goblin King is now lying down on the ground, and the creature begins to gulp down the whole of the Goblin King without even doubting it for a second. The only thing the protagonist feels like now is that the creature doesn't have the knowledge to recognize their own kind, which feels rather pathetic to the protagonist. Now the protagonist feels like the Goblin King must have forgotten his pride as a king as well, and instead of thinking of the situation morally, the monster keeps on charging at him in the worst possible way, and the tentacles keep on attacking the protagonist in each zone independently. The protagonist feels like he will have to avoid the strike in any way possible to ignore being hit, and running for a while places him in front of some kind of dead end of the path. Then when he begins smiling, saying that this kind of simple stuff is about to do nothing to him, the tentacles begin to hit the monster on its own, meaning that all of them are thinking indifferently, and the protagonist wonders if the monster is unable to even die in this situation. The more he looks into the monster, he feels like living must be nothing but a burden to him, and starts unsheathing the sword in his hand, adding that he will be making the situation rather easier for him right now. While wielding the mithril sword in his hand, the protagonist claims that he will be enough to finish the whole creature in one strike, and as the creature keeps on charging at him, he is unable to even fathom the situation for even a bit. When they begin communicating with each other, the protagonist relays the message of how he would have been failing in his life if he wasn't the director of the orphanage, and the only time he thinks of protecting his child is the one time he feels like he will be able to do everything in his life. He claims that everyone who thinks of damaging the orphanage will be beaten down by him. As the protagonist slashes down the monster, he feels like he will have nothing to wield right now as the sword broke after hitting the monster in half. As soon as he notices that the terrain has changed almost infinitely, he thinks of what must be happening on the opposite side of where he is right now. On the other hand, the ass Miyamoto keeps on acting brave and everything in front of the people. At the same time, he is unable to even fight against one simple goblin, and the more of the goblins keep on charging at them as if there are no limits to it. As soon as one huge and fat goblin is being held down by the other goblins, he feels like it must be the king they have been speaking of, and the protagonist feels like the mess will be cleaned by Miyamoto anyway. Also, the protagonist thinks that he wouldn't be able to handle a mess like this and feels like it should be convenient that the body of the king is disappearing on his own. Knowing that he will have to stop drawing any kind of attention, the protagonist goes back to his children and Shioni keeps on annoying the protagonist once again after getting him back once again. Then when the battle ends, the protagonist goes back to his previous lifestyle, and Lucia begins to start shopping with her master saying that the potatoes will be cheap in the market. Then the protagonist thinks that buying more will be quite preferable for them in this moment, but he feels like growing the potatoes themselves will be a lot better for them, as they will be able to save a lot of money by doing so. Just when he thinks of buying some seeds, the people can be heading somewhere as if they have been cheering for some kind of hero, and it seems that Miyamoto has been celebrating his fake victory by riding the royal horses, and the protagonist wonders what the Goblin King and the Gale One would be thinking of him right now. Even the people feel like Miyamoto had done something to save their whole kingdom, and they even claim that he must have slayed the goblin by one strike only, and it seems that they never really got to know about the truth what happened in the battlefield. Then Lucia claims that the monster was killed by her master initially in the Naria Plains, and people begin to wonder who she must be as she is making this kind of comment in the middle of the parade. Realizing that the situation will get worse, the protagonist starts holding her hand to take her away from the scene, and Lucia understands that she must have displeased her master in the first place. When they are alone in the forest on the way to their house, the protagonist suggests that she shouldn't go around saying unnecessary things, and she is unable to fathom why she is not allowed to tell the truth. But no matter what, the protagonist claims that he is not targeting the hero in the first place, and he feels like he needs to spend his life peacefully and quietly as much as he can. Then when she understands the wave of his words, she thinks of agreeing with him, and the protagonist reminds her that he wants to finish the paper prototype they have been working on for quite some time. Lucia feels like Aaron would love to accompany them as well, and someone named Ruby comes in claiming that she promised that she would be back once again. When she insists that there is no way her father is about to let the protagonist's heroism go unnoticed, the protagonist claims that he has a lot to do the whole day. But she insists that she is not about to go away that easily, and she claims that the guild leaders want to bring Naomi in, adding that the battle against the Goblin King has been being watched by the leaders through their far-sight skill. Then when the protagonist feels like he has been watched, he is rather violated, and Ruby claims that he managed to defeat the Goblin King rather easily. But the protagonist insists that he would love to keep himself low profile instead of bragging about it, and Ruby insists that Lucia should say something about it as well. Lucia claims that she would like it if the protagonist keeps on staying with them no matter what, and the protagonist states that he literally has nowhere else to go, and the protagonist keeps on insisting that Ruby should go back home instead of bothering them all. Now that she is gone, the protagonist feels like Ruby wasted his energy for no reason at all, and Aaron claims that she has already returned with the paper prototypes. Then when she presents the prototypes in front of the protagonist, he feels like they will never be able to write on them as they are rather weak, meaning that they are nothing but complete pieces of crap. Even though the papers are weak, he thinks that the weeds from the garden will be useful in this case, and the protagonist lets her pass this time around. Then the protagonist claims that they will be selling these picture books under the name of the orphanage, and when the house once again blows up, it seems that Shioni is the one who is to be blamed for it once again. Even though the protagonist was worrying about her pissing her pants, she claims that she has been practicing magic this whole time, but the protagonist insists that she should leave the house to do something like that. Then they realize that she has been eating the remaining food in the house while sipping the tea and using her magic. Then when he thinks of making everything right at once, a woman with a sword in her sheath claims that the protagonist is now under arrest. Then when she keeps on screaming his name, the protagonist comes in front of her saying that she has been entering someone else's property without any reason, so it means that she should explain herself at first. As soon as she feels like he has a point, she bows in front of him, claiming that she is the one at fault, and that the lady seems to be from the kingdom's child protection policy industry. After fixing her mood once again, she claims that the protagonist is under the suspicion of abusing a child and now he will have to surrender without resisting as soon as possible. But the protagonist is now unable to wonder what she is even speaking of, and she enrages against him as she has the name which is Utasia and not a woman. After keeping some distance between them, Lucia enters in the middle saying that they are too close to each other, and the protagonist even claims that she should now go away from where she came from. Then when Utasia claims that her words have been justified as he stopped calling her like that, Shione meddles in saying that the protagonist didn't call her by her name as well in the beginning when they met. Then when the protagonist feels like she has been messing with them from the start, Utasia claims that she has not been messing around as he is really under the suspicion of child abuse, and he will be taken into custody and the orphans will be placed in other orphanages and foster homes. Even though the protagonist doesn't know the laws that exists in this country, he feels like he didn't do anything that will think of holding him accountable like that. But Utasia claims that he is still about to act like he is nothing but innocent, which is a play for him. And she claims that people have been witnessing that he has been dealing with the children like they are nothing but criminals in the first place. Then when she claims that they have some kind of proof from an informant, she adds that they were given a tip that someone important such as the Prime Minister himself personally approached the authorities to take action against him, but there is no way some orphanage is supposed to be the concern of the royalty to even begin with. She insists that he had done something wrong, which is laid out on the information received by them, and the way the information presented in front of him feels like it must be some kind of joke. Then Lucia claims that he has never touched them even if they sleep in the same bed as him. He must be a gentleman, and the way of sleeping in one bed makes Utasia react about it as it is rather uncanny. Then Aaron claims that there are several reasons for that since she is unable to even sleep without him, and Shione backs him up saying that the protagonist is not someone who is able to do something wrong. Even though Shione begins saying that they have been thinking of having some children, Utasia begins to relay the useless information back and forth to each other while the protagonist feels like he is about to lose his mind. Then as the protagonist claims that the whole thing presented by her is nothing but lies, and even Utasia claims that the story doesn't add up without any kind of evidence, so she will continue to stay in the orphanage herself so she will be able to witness the truth on her own. Then when she starts getting close to the children, she claims that she will make sure that the protagonist is not someone who does wrong things to them. Even though the protagonist thinks that he is not about to allow someone like her, Aaron thinks that it will be better for him to accept it sooner rather than later. Then the protagonist begins presenting the rules that she will have to abide by for staying in this place, and the whole bunch of information goes over her head. Even though Utasia agrees, the protagonist feels like he has yet to soften from his previous state, and feels like he will have to see how life goes in here for him for the next few days. Then when Utasia claims that he must have been committing fraud to begin with, the protagonist comes in saying that he has presented her coffee, which is a popular beverage from his world. Then when she thinks that she will have to taste it beforehand, the protagonist claims that she can surely do that if she wants to, and the protagonist claims that she will have to eat extra vegetables as punishment. Just when she drinks the coffee, she ends up spitting the whole thing on the protagonist himself, and she claims that it is rather hot for her to drink. The protagonist feels like there is a chance that she is a heavy idiot in the first place, as there was no one like her who would think of drinking coffee like that. And Utasia claims that she doesn't dislike the taste of the coffee, and the protagonist insists that she shouldn't be drinking too much as she will be unable to fall asleep if that happens. Then when Utasia claims that she is sorry for creating that much of a racket, the protagonist feels like it is fine, and she is surprised to see that he is not even mad at her in the first place. The protagonist claims that he will have something new to present in their orphanage's cafe, which is also named Luna after the orphanage. After things are moving, Shione, Lucia, and Aaron come in together wearing their new outfit in the first place. Then Shione begins asking the protagonist if her outfit is showing enough for him, including the waist, and Utasia begins to wonder if she has to dress up like them as well as if they are looking like maids. After discussing the outfit matter for a while, the protagonist thinks that an apron for her will be enough, and everyone agrees with him as well. Then as the cafe begins to run, they feel like the situation is going rather well for them, and the protagonist notices that Utasia is not working as she is standing in one of the corners. But it seems that her behavior is the only thing that makes people reluctant to order from her, and the protagonist handles the matter on behalf of Utasia. But after a while, the protagonist feels like Aaron and Lucia are reacting in such a weird way. And when he realizes that both of them are drunk of caffeine and even the customers are feeling rather weird witnessing them, the protagonist thinks of closing the shop for the day. In the end of the line, when Utasia claims that she will have to investigate about it, the protagonist insists that they are all restricted from drinking coffee from now on and thinks of having an early bath for the day.